every situation. We good? Okay. There is no way to give you a guaranteed answer for every situation. It is situation by situation based. And this is also where the deficit of behavior analysts comes into play, where we've had the critical thinking skills beat out of us. You follow this plan, you don't veer from it, don't ask questions, don't offer a better way. This is the plan. Don't think, just do. And that is to our detriment. And so then the final principle is positive purpose. And that is really looking beyond the surface of, oh, look, the learner learned this skill. They're fluent. Look at the data. Because a learner can learn a skill and it still be a harmful journey and a harmful outcome. So is the work that we're doing truly empowering them? I get really discouraged when I hear people say, I'm really disappointed that ABA has become political. It's always been political because existing as a disabled individual is a political act in and of itself, especially here in the States. When every congressional decision, when every, you know, program or process is potentially on the chopping block that directly impacts your ability to not just thrive, but survive, you are existing as a political act. And so, if in this field we are truly working to empower individuals who are living in a set of systems designed to harm or keep them restricted from a quality of life, if we're really working to empower them to advocate against those systems, the work that we do is political. And that can be a hard pill to swallow. You can't stand on the sidelines and say, I'm not taking a side. The moment you got into this field to work with individuals who are autistic or who have other disabilities, in order to give them skills that empower them to have a voice, to advocate, the moment you walked into that type of work, you walked into political work. So moving
The
on.
Lord's work.
Amen.
So this next break, we're going to be touching on all of the buffers as we can. So this is another one of the buffers as suggested by our friends in the work of trauma within the medical community, as well as per the suggestion of Dr. Camille Kolu from a behavior analytic lens. So I'm going to encourage y'all again, go ahead, turn off your camera if you would like to, or leave it on, whatever you're feeling today. And I am encouraging you to either do 3 times of the sun salutation or do some stretching, deep breathing as you will. I'm going to turn off my camera just because I'm going to do some sun salutations and we don't all need to see that. Welcome back, everyone. I know, right? I like seeing the smiles on everybody's faces. After you take a little moment for yourself, it helps. It might feel ridiculous to do a sun salutation in front of others, but that's okay. You can still do something for yourself. Get some energy up, pee, look in the mirror.
I think it's my turn now. Um, I'm up to talk about engaging. I'm going to do my best. Sorry, I sound a little like Kermit the Frog. Um, it's all part of the shtick. I'm just kidding. Um, you know, every time I say this, every time we present, and every time Mari shares this section, something else comes up for me. And I am going to take a moment to share because it's my turn and I want to. So we were having a bit of a culture problem in one of our clinics. And if you've ever worked around a lot of people, or even not a lot of people, when that kind of energy gets in there, gets real icky real quick. And so I have been spending a lot of my time. We recently opened up a second clinic. I've been spending a lot of my time over there because, of course, I need to, right? And so this information makes it up to me and to HR. And so we do the things that, as HR and a leader of an organization, we need to do. And a lot of the dialogue that I was hearing was, well, the culture at Sprout, well, the culture at Sprout. And so I called what some might call a come to Jesus with my team in this particular clinic. And we sat down and I said, I have to say, this isn't the culture at Sprout. This is the culture in this clinic. And you know whose fault that is? It's all of yours. You're actually all the people who are in here, right? That are impacting the culture, who are not being responsive to one another, who are not looking at one another humanely and compassionately and giving one another grace. And so y'all want to come to me. I said y'all, by the way, to them and right now. Y'all want to come to me and say, well, this or that, but I'm coming to you and say, that's actually up to all of you. It isn't up to me. I can sit here and remind you of the organizational values. I can sit here and have a conversation about how we don't do that, and it's not in our policies and procedures. But what y'all need to do is engage in some reflective practice. And so I led them through a reflective practice exercise. And someone said that it was actually kind of like an AA meeting where we like went around and said, this is how I contributed poorly to this environment. This is how my behavior did or didn't meet a value of this organization. This is how I am or am not, feeling like a person of integrity. And we had this whole huddle for like 2 hours where everyone kind of went through and engaged in some self-reflection and engaged in some repair with one another. And at the end, they were like, wow, that feels really different. And I was like, yeah, and you all could have done this with one another, and I didn't even need to come over here and cancel half of our day. Um, which maybe was a little snarky. But the point is that we're all responsible for how we're showing up, right? How we're viewing the people who are around us, how we're holding space for them, how we're giving them grace, and how we're adjusting our behavior accordingly. And so now we're kind of a week and a half on the other side of that. And people are like, wow, it's so different. I'm so glad you did that. And I was like, I didn't do anything. I led an exercise, but you all did the work. And if you do that every day, you won't actually have to worry about going back there. Um, anyway, just a little kind of anecdote that we talk about it with learners, right? And we talk about it with parents, and it's with techs, and it's with BCBAs, and it's with leadership, and it's with, in all the things we do. Okay, so engaging. True engagement versus expected engagement. So it's important to know that how a learner engages looks differently for each implementer. this should be expected because each person is different and presents differently, right? So the way I might show as engaged is different than the way somebody else might show as engaged. It's nuanced, context matters, and often that's what's not accounted for, right? And so we consider engagement based off of what we think a learner is supposed to do in a certain time, right? Or in a certain way, right? So the way I know you're engaged right now is because you're looking at me, nodding your head, and following along. Well, half of you aren't doing that, and that's fine, right? You're not engaged. You might be taking notes. You might be, I don't know, I was like getting a tissue or whatever. The way that we show up and our presentation is different for everybody. And it's important that we take that into consideration when we're considering what true engagement really looks like. One of the other soapboxes I want to get on here for a second, because I love a soapbox, is where we talk about like pairing procedures, right? And oftentimes when texts start, this like really irks me when people say this, I'm not gonna lie. Pairing is a technical procedure that we utilize to create neutral stimuli into reinforcing stimuli. It's a conditioning process, right? So to assume the pre-existing condition holds reinforcement value needs to occur, right? So when you have one tech and a new tech that is now pairing, you're assuming that that person held reinforcing value to begin with, which hopefully they did, but they did not necessarily, right? And so simply by being in their presence, that does not necessarily mean that pairing, right? Or that kind of carryover is going to happen. And so, what we're really talking about when people say pairing is we're talking about building rapport. Building rapport and pairing aren't the same thing. I certainly could sit with you and hold up your favorite chocolates and give them to you and share a glass of champagne because I know that Meg likes that, right? Or do this or that and pair myself with your most preferred things. And you could be like, oh, Jen's cool. Does that mean that like you know me? No. What we need to do to get to the place of engagement, right, is to get to know somebody, right? And certainly to get to a place where we are happy, relaxed, and engaged. And we're going to talk more about that on the next slide and how that is simply just not enough. Um, and so I think it's important that we make that distinction, that those two things are not the same. What we're talking about is that's right. It's not just giving reinforcers in close proximity to a fun thing, right? Like I could absolutely, so I can tell this story because this is legal in the state in which I live. Okay, so in Massachusetts, cannabis is legal. So we have dispensaries. And so you can walk into a dispensary if you are above the age of, I don't know, 18 or 21. I don't actually know because I'm 42 and it doesn't matter. And purchase cannabis. And so this little girl made the news because she is a Girl Scout. And in the US, what do Girl Scouts sell? Cookies. And do you know where she set up shop? Directly in front of the dispensary. Now, that is a good idea, right? That is a great idea. So, to Rachel's point, she could stand in front of the dispensary and just hand out cookies, right? Like, good for you, good for you, save this one for later, right? Good for you. Now it is genius. She made a lot of money. She was on the news. She like sold more boxes than anybody, right? I was like, now that is a good idea. Um, and so, sure, you could do that, but that doesn't actually mean that we understand one another, right? It means you understand the contingencies surrounding my behavior, right? Or potentially the substances that might be utilized, right? In this case. But that doesn't mean that we get each other. Rapport is about getting each other, right? When you have a relationship with someone, you're like, ah, you get me. You get me. You know that like the way that I do this is because of that, or the way I do this is because of that, or the way that that happens is because of this, right? And that's where kind of the real relationship comes into play. I was talking to somebody this week who is a colleague of mine through SCS, and he's doing a presentation on HRE in adults. And so, of course, someone was like, "You should talk to Jen." And I was like, "Well, you're going to get my whole shtick now, right?" And we were having this discussion about like what HRE truly means and how it really means that relationship and identifying that, because he was kind of like, "Well, it just kind of happened," and I was like, "It didn't just actually happen. You did some very objective things that made that occur. And what are they, right? It's about that flexibility. It's about that leaning in. It's about making it about you and not about me. Think about the people that you really feel get you. Why do they get you? Because they took the time to get you and to get to know you. They didn't make it all about themselves. You know the people you call when something's going on and they get you, right? And you know the people you don't because they're like, "Oh, honey." And you're like, "I don't want someone to, oh, honey, me." And like, that doesn't mean you're not cool for this other thing, but that's not the same, right? And so when we're working with learners who everything sometimes is really hard, and because our ABA history is not great or grim, and they have been in these situations where they have had these adverse experiences, that really, really matters. Mari was talking about, R1, R2, R3 behaviors. You can't really identify them if you're not willing to. And what I mean by that is like you have to peel the layers of what it all means to you to be able to kind of get in there and see those pieces, right? As analysts, we are trained to look and observe, but it's one thing to observe and it's another thing to really understand, right? And if you're not really understanding and getting really in there, in the book, we use this analogy about not following a recipe, right? Anyone can follow a recipe. My 10-year-old follows recipes and makes dinner. My 10-year-old is not a chef. He is adorable. It is fantastic. He does a lovely job. Also, I can follow recipes. I am not a chef. There's a difference. Anyone can follow a written protocol and a written set of procedures. The difference between an interventionist, right? An implementer and an analyst is that an analyst is able to look at the whole scope of the meal, the whole scope of the soup. And this is where I have nothing to say because I'm going to say a bunch of things that probably isn't anything you do to make a soup, right? But you have to look at it. What's the flavor dynamic, right? How much of this, Maudie's our spice girl, how much of this is going to go in here? How much of this is going to go in here? I need this ratio of this and this to get right there. That's analysis, right? Betty Crocker already did the analysis to tell you how to make, any number of things that I make from Betty Crocker. I don't know what they are because I don't make any of them. But you know what I mean. The people at Toll House already did the work on how to make the cookies. I can follow that recipe. I didn't do that work, right? As behavior, I'm glad that I can get a chuckle from all of you guys. As behavior analysts, it is our job to figure out the recipe. You can't figure out the recipe without the humility, without the flexibility, without the responsiveness, and without figuring out what engagement looks like, right? And the same for happy and relaxed. And I say it with air quotes because those are very surface level emotions. And we're actually talking about what's down here. And Greg is too, right? And so like we simplify things in research and in other areas because someone's got to follow a protocol. But like it really on paper sounds like, "Oh, you're just looking for happy, relaxed, and engaged." You're not. It's not like that, right? And so the engagement is a bi-directional experience that's occurring with an implementer and a learner that is observable and it's measurable and there's assent and there's all these things that are happening simultaneously to get you there. Does that make sense? That was a big, long soapbox. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about some of my favorite people. Um, Meg and Maudie. I'm just kidding. It's not those two this time. A couple of my other favorite people. This is one of my favorite articles, a newly favorite, because I didn't actually know it existed until we started writing this book, which was both a shock because this has, for a long time, Dr. Holly Gover is one of my favorite researchers. I often say that I am the president of her fan club. Ditu might argue otherwise, but I'm certainly VP of it. And she and John Staubitz out of Vanderbilt wrote this article on a focus on happy, relaxed, and engaged students. And it's actually the only published article that truly defines what HRE actually is, because that's one of the things we were talking about is everyone wants to talk about HRE, which is awesome. We're thrilled that people are talking about HRE, right? Like many people have been talking about HRE for like a while. And so like everyone's very excited we're talking about this. This is great. It's good dissemination, but it's our job to go to, we did go right to the source. That's right. It is our job to define things and to go to research. And what happens is when people, particularly our field is very young, most of our practitioners are certified for 5 or less years. And what do we teach people to do? Go to the research. But when you go to the research and you type in happy, relaxed, and engaged. I don't know what the hits are because I haven't done that one, but I did do compassionate care in Java, and the hits are 0, and the hits in behavior analysis and practice was 5. Now I realize you could change the terms and all this, but when you say to a new practitioner, "Hey, you should be engaging in compassionate care," and they're like, "What's compassionate care?" And they go to their friendly local journal, right? Or they go into their BACB portal like they're supposed to, and they type it in, and they're getting no hits. Someone's got to tell them what it is. And that's our goal in Reframe, to do that and kind of define a lot of the things that the field is talking about, that maybe there is not a, or not maybe, there is not really a good solid resource to be able to go and just pull. So this article in particular really reframes reinforcement in an educational setting by emphasizing the emotional and behavioral well-being. So rather than relying kind of solely on the tokens and rewards, they advocate for reinforcers for students to be happy, relaxed, and engaged. And so some of the key points are that, surrounding happiness in students signals effective reinforcement. But like, think about happy, right? So one of the things I often think about, and like we talk about this, is like you can't be happy and you can't be relaxed if someone who makes you anxious is sitting next to you, right? That's actually not possible. And so it actually goes beyond that, right? It goes beyond, and sometimes like content is okay. Like I go to work some days and I'm not always happy and I'm totally content to do my job, but like I'm not thrilled. Like I have a hard job and sometimes people are assholes and like it's tough, and insurance is stressful. And sometimes like I'm just like, whatever, here I am, and that's okay. And so knowing that for your learner is really important too. Really identifying individualized reinforcement based off of what the student loves, whether those are direct choices, observation, preference assessments. I'm going to be honest, I'm going to say the thing. I don't think preference assessments are worthwhile. I've never thought that they were worthwhile. I understand the utility of it. A free operant preference assessment is your best bet. Put a learner in because they are shit. Thank you. I'm sorry. I know someone worked really hard on all the research around preference assessments. I know I'm not supposed to say that, but your best bet is just pay attention. Preference changes, context matters. We were talking about people's work that is not being political. I know that we talked about this already in Dallas. Someone tell Izzy Golddiamond why in 1974 someone wasn't listening to what he was saying about constructivist approach to behavior. As a Jewish man in 1974 in America, no one wanted to hear what he had to say, right? And so people are still preaching the same thing, that context matters. Freeing up your operant matters. Degrees of freedom matter, right? All of that matters. All of that comes into play into every context, every behavior, all the time. So your preference assessment isn't actually going to show any of them. But if you were a good analyzer, if you were a good behavior analyst and you are paying attention, it actually won't be hard. I have heard people say, I worked for someone like this it didn't for a very short period of time. That was like at the beginning of every session, you need to conduct a preference assessment. And I was like, you need to kiss my, I was like, no, I don't. I actually don't. I am skilled in working within motivation and skilled in instructional control and instructional motivation. I actually don't need to do that. And I'm going to say, if you're skilled in those two things, you don't need to do it either. And so you're not going to find out what somebody's happiness is through a preference assessment, but you will find it when you support trust, when you look at motivation and you increase in motivation and you create positive implementer student relationships. And so in this article, they talk about it as positive student teacher relationships, but it doesn't matter. You can change teacher. That's because that's the environment they did the research in. Change teacher for implementer. It doesn't matter. Some of the context in the article matters related to schools, but a lot of it doesn't. And then relaxed. So they define relaxed when a student feels safe, unpressured, and free from unnecessary adult direction during breaks. I call relaxed, we call relaxed, right? Regulated, right? Your body can't be dysregulated and relaxed at the same time. There has to be regulation, right? You have to feel safe. It has to be free of coercion. You have to be attended to. There's a bi-directionality that is occurring. Relaxation looks different for every student, but typically includes a calm body, language, and minimal instructional demands, recognizing signs of agitation. So again, really, really individualized, responding by reducing demands. And so some of this also like depends on your learner. What is um sorry, I lost my train of thought. What is their preferred attention? So like some learners, like they don't want you to talk to them, but other learners, like they do want you to talk to them. So like think about when you're stressed out, like don't say relax because that's not going to work, right? Nobody relax simply because somebody said that. Do you want someone to talk to you? I saw a new tech do this the other day. A kid was like dysregulated and they're like, do you want this? Do you want this? Do you want to go over here? Do you want to go over here? And all I kept thinking in my head was like, he actually wants you to shut up. Like, actually, just stop talking. Like, stop talking. And so this is also where knowing your learner is really important, to know what helps them be relaxed. And sometimes that might be you, and sometimes it might not be you. And both of those things are okay. You also have to have enough wherewithal in yourself to realize that that's not about you, right? Oh, well, they don't want me right now. Okay, like, why are you so upset about that? Like, if that hurts you, then you're probably in the wrong field because far worse things are going to happen. You're going to be called names. All sorts of things are going to occur. It's not about you. And engagement. Engagement reflects a student's active involvement with the materials, social interactions, and serves as a marker of meaningful reinforcement. Instructors should offer personalized, varied materials. So, like a lot of times, the reason that students aren't engaged is because your materials suck. Sorry. They're boring. They're not engaging. They've done it 72 different times. Nobody likes your picture cards. And I love a picture card as much as the next person. I'm not saying don't use any picture cards, but it's mundane. It's boring. You're doing the same thing over and over. Nobody said that behavior, well, that's not true. Somebody did say that behavior analysis occurred at a table and you re-implemented the same stimuli over and over. But guess what? They actually weren't the best instructors. And so what the best instructors, a la precision teachers tell you to do is keep your materials dynamic, keep them robust, change them up, make them interesting. No one wants to engage with somebody that's boring. It's boring. They don't want to do it because it's boring. And so make it not boring and you'll have a more engaged learner. It should be supportive. It should not be intrusive. Don't nag them. And true engagement should come from the student's interest, not from the adult direction. Okay. Thoughts or questions about that? Thanks. Okay. You're up, Meg,
Snaps
on
all around. I love that soapbox.
second.
So I'm going to tell you too, the reason why we wanted to do this workshop is that every time that we've tried to present all this material, we've run out of time. So y'all are getting the unedited, true version of how we've been attempting to present this material for some time. So thanks, Jen and Maddie. I'm so happy to share this space with y'all because I love these soapboxes. There are just soap suds all around, and it makes me very happy. I feel very clean.
Good.
Also, I'm glad everybody can hear us well because that's what soapbox are all about. So I love these soapbox moments. Thank you again, y'all. And just to recap where we are right now, we've gone through responsive and engaging. We're now coming into the F of reframe. This is flexible. So Madi beautifully described how we are attempting to not should on y'all necessarily or on this field, but on each other, like calling each other in of how we can be responsive with our practices so that we're not again reacting, we're not pushing, we're not bringing our own bias to the table. And then Jen, this is how we engage, right? We're really going to get down to this analytical level of how we're going to bring our learners into this space with us, because that's essentially what we're trying to do, right? We're all on this journey together. And so it's how we meet each other, how we hold each other's hands, as Maddie was saying earlier too. Okay, so what my big soapbox is ACT. And the reason that ACT is my big soapbox is because this field nearly crippled me to the point of no return, to the point of I took on every single caregiver stress. There was a program for every single stress that they threw in my way, right? And then I wasn't there I wasn't able to then show up for my own family in a way that was in alignment with my values. I think that we've all been in a place like that. We call it burnout. We call it being in a shitty mood. We call it many different things, but the reality is that it's when we're being too rigid with what we expect applied behavior analysis to look like, and when we expect our lives to look a certain way. So, what ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, did for me is help me release the things that I can't control. And this has also helped me show up in a safer way, in a more responsive way, and in a more engaging way with my learners and with my staff. And I'm not saying my as in like an ownership way, but in this relationship way, like my friend. That's how I'm using these terms when I say my and our, not with ownership, but with a mutual respect and understanding and community. So, what I found was that anytime that I had these feelings that were really uncomfortable and almost paralyzing, it was because there was something in conflict with my values. So, in the instance that I was talking about earlier, when I'm carrying all of that stuff from the other caregivers, the people who aren't even in my immediate home, but when I'm focused on their homes and their environments and wanting to improve that, whenever I'm not currently present with them, I was holding on to this in a very toxic and cancerous way rather than being able to release the things that are no longer in my present moment and my present environment and my context so that I could fully engage with what was happening. And this is different than compartmentalizing, right? Because what I'm doing then is signaling to those caregivers when I'm here on Monday, this is what we're going to tackle. Thank you for letting me know. I've heard you. I'm honoring what you say. And now I'm going to release this because it's a Friday afternoon. And I'm going to now spend time living within my values, with this community right here, because that is where I need to be right now. Not responding to something else, but right here. That's also then how I know that whenever this is over, this particular workshop this afternoon, whenever we've signed off, everybody says leave meeting in for all, I'm going to show up for my kids because that's what's in alignment with my values. But I also know that after this, like I might get a text message from Rachel or Jen and Maddie, but I'm not then going to continue to engage in that. I'm going to pause. And because I know that Maddie and Jen also live within their values, they're not going to be like, man, why is Meg not responding to me right now? Because this moment right now is over and she's with her kids. That's why. She's living moment by moment within her values. And they also recognize this as being people who also practice ACT. It's not theirs to own right now. My behavior is not theirs to own in that moment, right? We need to also recognize this as a field. As behavior practitioners, we need to understand what is ours to own and what isn't. And we often, as we said earlier, get into this field because we ourselves have experienced a lack of control. But instead of leaning into what we can control, which is our own lives, we project towards others. Let me tell you what you should be doing instead. And I feel like that can easily come across in this book as though, like, we're trying to tell y'all this is what you should be doing. We're not saying that at all. And the reason I say that is because we make a lot of mistakes and we keep showing up and we keep practicing instead of completely turning away from this field altogether because it's too hard, because it will just continuously slap you in the face. And it's not just working with difficult or challenging behaviors. That has nothing to do with it many days. Sometimes it's just trying to do the business side of it that will just keep trying to pull you down. But I guarantee you that the three of us, and I say the three of us as in Maddie, Jen, and myself, we continue to show up because our values are in this work. And I will also speak for the three of us because I know this conversation all too well. We did not get into this field for money. So when everybody talks about like, well, everybody works for a paycheck. We don't. This is how we know that our values are in alignment with what we're doing. And this was the best advice that my dad ever gave me when I was 21 years old. And it was this: you will know that you are doing the work that you are meant to do because you will go without getting paid to do it. And it's still okay to get paid to do it. And yeah, Jen, literally, all of us experience what it's like whenever an insurance company is not paying. And I think many on the front line don't necessarily realize this, but insurance really just kind of says, you know what? There was a glitch in the system, so we're just not paying for this learner for how long? Just keep trying to resubmit that claim, and maybe it'll pay. It's truly that way. And it seems like it's the wild, wild west. You're like, that can't be. No, it is. It's 100% the way that it is. So just so you're all are aware, like, yes, this is what's been projected and what's budgeted, and then this is what's paid. And then maybe this will trickle in, but only after everything else has been paid. So again, we have to be flexible with what we do and recognizing that we are doing challenging work, but we're also doing work that is quality and compassionate because that's what we care about. And we will go without getting paid because we understand that that is not the immediate goal, is not what our ultimate value is. Because values aren't necessarily attainable. They're this thing that keeps you motivated, intrinsically moving forward. waking up every single day. When we struggle with that, that's when we struggle to wake up some days. That's when we struggle to take a shower some days. That's when we need to say, like, what is going on? What do I need to do to realign my behavior with moving forward at a bare minimum? How can I get that behavioral momentum going in my own life? And that's how we do this. So, our hope with Reframe was to introduce several different case studies and scenarios throughout the book to help demonstrate how this can be generalizable across different settings. We talked about the classroom setting with the Gover article. The classroom setting is going to come up quite a bit because that's where we often get called. But we're also going to talk about the home environment and what that looks like. And I know that many of us got into this field because we wanted to make a difference. But sometimes what we find is that unless we're working on that flexibility piece, what we're teaching in the clinic is not ever going to generalize to the places that are most meaningful for these learners and for these families. Okay, we're going to take a quick break here, but it's a little bit more ACT aligned. So here's what I want you to do. I know a few of us are familiar with precision teaching. If you aren't, this is going to be a great introduction for you. So we are going to do a 30-second timing. And that timing is really just going to be how quickly you can list your values. So I'm going to encourage you to grab just a sheet of notebook paper, your agenda, post-it note, whatever it might be. Grab a pen or a pencil, and I'll know that you're ready because your eyes will be up on me. And then we'll start our timer for 30 seconds. You can hold your pen up in the air too. That will also signal to me, just like it does in a classroom for any great direct instructor. Beautiful. All right, we've got 30 seconds. And when I say write, you're going to write as many values as you can think of in that 30 seconds. Write. Here's our timer. Pens down, pencils down. Awesome. Now you'll look through some of those that you wrote down, and some of them might have a little bit more of a tangible component to it, or maybe you've even attached a person to it. Totally fine. This is just an exercise. This is a practice, an assessment. Now see how you can analyze those a little bit further and break them down just a little bit more to find what that common thread is. And that's the value. So for example, I wrote cooking, family, outside, community, friends, art, music, and alone time. Kind of contradictory. I understand. We are complex creatures. Um, However, community, friends, family, those three things are all together, right? So really what that means is that I value quality time within my community, right? Yeah. So it's a little bit different, but we can analyze these things into a little bit of a different way. Now, if I look at alone time, art and music, and cooking, really, those activities are things that I do enjoy doing by myself. So maybe what those things do for me is help me practice creativity. Because when I'm alone is when I can really let my mind wander. When I'm cooking, I can also let my mind wander. But when I'm engaging in music or art, that's where I'm really then creating that space, right? So the creativity process is something that I value. Okay. So I'm going to encourage y'all to do that as well with what you wrote down. And that way we can also really think about what we truly value versus maybe the tangible or transactional component that we often attach to things as part of that pairing process without recognizing that what we truly value is a little bit more nuanced than that and a little bit more inner and a little bit more radical and rooted in maybe our history and who we are as ourselves as well. Okay, cool. Any questions about the values exercise? Awesome. Okay, so at the beginning of this too, we talked about how we do want this to be pretty far-reaching. I know. We're radical behaviorists, so I wouldn't expect anything different from us, in all honesty. But when we think about radical behaviorists, what we really are talking about here is being aware of our own inner behavior and how that shows up to the environment. So we're not asking that we really dig deep into what this happy is, right? Or relaxed is, or engaged is, until we've been able to determine that for ourselves. And the reason for that is that we won't know unless we're willing to go that deep for ourselves. So we do have to go really, really, really far reaching. This also doesn't mean that we need to continue to push our learners to distress and call that far reaching. And Maddie and Jen were talking about this earlier as well, because Hanley's been talking about this for about 30 years, y'all. 1997 is when this first came out. That's crazy. When I was in high school, we were already talking about these things. And the fact that now we've gotten so far away from that idea is pretty ridiculous to me, in my opinion. So we're still pushing our learners to these distressing responses, and we're calling that radical. That's not radical. What radical means is that we're willing to do this deep, 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 deep inner work so that when we show up to these spaces, we can quickly and fluently access what's going on in our own bodies so that when we are presenting something to them or changing something in this other person's environment, that we are giving them that same grace, that same space, and showing up in a way that's safe and responsive and engaging and flexible for them. We can't claim that we are radical behaviorists unless we are doing this ourselves. So when we are starting to get into the origin story of our forefathers within the field of behavior analysis, there's not a single one of them who wasn't a radical behaviorist. And do you know how we know this? They talked about it. They literally published papers about it, about what we should be doing. When we use Skinner's schedule of reinforcements with pigeons, he's talking about pigeons. He's not talking about children. When Lovaas took these applications from our forefathers and applied them to nonverbal children, what parallel was he making? That our nonverbal children are on the same developmental level as a pigeon? So this is what we need to think about whenever we're thinking about how far do we need to go. We need to go pretty fucking far, y'all. We are scratching the surface with what we're doing right now. So it is important that we talk about, yeah, sorry. You knew it was going to happen eventually. But we need to start talking about this a little bit more, about these parallels that are happening within our field. We need to start recognizing that our inner behavior is not just our inner behavior. I know that when I get riled up, that other people also get riled up. That's a shared experience. Our inner behaviors are much more connected than we'd like to recognize and realize. Because that means that I have to feel something for somebody else rather than just focusing on my own personal little bubble where I can not even focus on myself, but just focus on the surface level of what I see. We are completely neglecting 3/4, if not more, of our science when we only focus on what we can see. And that's a disservice to ourselves. That's a disservice to our field. And again, I quote this every single time because Britt Kubina is one of my favorite people. You are doing a disservice if you are not accounting for inner behavior. There is a ton of research out there to support how we can, as behavior analysts, work with inner behavior, and yet we just choose not to. It's time to change. It's time to move forward. And that is what we're calling on everybody to do in this book as well, is to go that far and to go that deep. So that whenever, what Jen's about to talk about here in just a second, whenever we start talking about what a scent withdrawal looks like, we aren't guessing. We see it in real time because we also are able to recognize and observe those subtle shifts because something changed within the inner behavior as well. All of us have tells, right? Every single one of us. We think that we mask well enough so that nobody sees it, but it's not true. And if we're willing to chip away our own armor, right, our own mask, we'll be able to see that much more readily. And yeah, and Jen put this in the chat. And like I said earlier, we're going to include all of these articles, not all of them because it's a lot, but we're going to include quite a bit of these articles, but especially the Kubina Calkin. There's a Kubina Brown article. Jared Van just published one about reducing anxiety in students using timings. So the timing that we just did with our values, that's a timing that I do with one of our learners right now who's 16 years old. And she loves it. We do values timings, we do committed actions timings. We go far and we go deep. And the reason that we do is because she needs it and we need it. We all need to go this far. All right, that's my soapbox moment.
Well, I'm going to hop up there next to you here for a second because I think who some of the modern day people consider to be our kind of modern day forefathers of behavior analysis, they share the cover of the White Book, right? Cooper, Heron, and Heward. Dr. Kabina's mentor is John Cooper, Dr. John Cooper, and he is one of the people who, him and Dr. Abigail Calkin started doing inner behavior work. And so Bill Heward also engages in, has done some work around that in the educational system. And so I think, one of the things we kind of often talk about is a lot of this was there the whole time. People just didn't really want to look for it. So when you go back into Skinner's work and you look at Beyond Freedom and Dignity, and you look at Skinner, you look at about behaviorism and you look at science and human behavior, it's all in there. All of this stuff was in there the whole time. There's a quote in the book about learners existing in environments that are plentiful of reinforcement and that cannot be shared with coercion. And that's from Beyond Freedom and Dignity. And so again, a lot of these things were there, are still there. But not everybody wants to look for it. Okay, ascent is one of those things. So the kind of research around ascent is newer. The work around ascent-based care is not as new. And so some of that is So in precision teaching, again, still on this topic, Dr. Ogden Lindsley, who is, the founding father, if you will, of precision teaching, said that doing research in precision teaching was essentially a waste of time, which is why there's not a lot of research on precision teaching in some of the areas that are within precision teaching, because he essentially said by the time something gets published, it's actually old news. We can do more if we just do it in practice, we do it well, and we share it amongst ourselves. And so, unfortunately, that exists in precision teaching until this day. And that's why a lot of the things that have lingered there for a long time aren't in published works, because a lot of our journals don't accept, a lot of behavior analytic journals don't accept the chart. So precision teachers are like, wow, if you don't accept me, then I reject you, right? And assent is one of those things. So assent is a practice that's existed in the precision teaching community for a long time. It's also a practice that has existed in animal behavior training for a very long time. There's a few different examples of the book. One that comes to mind for me is the work of Dr. Drew Bulla. He does a lot of work with wolves. And if you have ever had an animal and you have had to give said animal any kind of medication, there are a couple of different ways that you can give animals medication, right? You can give them orally, or you can give them up their rectum, right? And so that is true for many animal species. And so Dr. Bulla's work with wolves was around, there are certain medical procedures that you have to do rectally, and using a scent-based treatment, and honoring a scent withdrawal. He taught wolves to successfully engage in these medical procedures to ensure quality of care. And if you ever get the chance to see him present on it, you should, because it's absolutely hysterical. Because he is absolutely hysterical, but his work, again, we're focusing on doing this with wolves and tigers and animals, which is wonderful. But for some reason, nobody thought maybe we should do this with children. Um, and so, um, Assent refers to the agreement to participate in services. So sometimes people get really confused between what is the difference between consent and assent. I don't think this group is confused about that, so I don't really need to talk to you about that. But it is a bi-directional agreement that occurs on an ongoing basis, all moments, every moment, throughout the entirety of programming. You either are electing to engage or you're electing to not engage. It's something that needs to be continuously evaluated for, and a constant place to make decisions. So if the learner withdraws assent, deciding what does that mean in this moment. One of the common misconceptions about assent is that it means that you just let a learner do whatever they want. And that's not true. Boundaries are important. Boundaries are important in everything. We can't just let anybody do whatever they want. If we let someone who elopes just elope whenever they want, they could get hit by a car, they could get hit by a bus, they could run into a river and drown, right? All sorts of different things could occur. So teaching those boundary conditions is very important. Um, in my clinic, we use universal protocols where we outline, like, we have this, like, we think about it like a traffic light system, like green, yellow, red. What's like green means go. These are the behaviors that like mean go. Full assent withdrawal. Yellow behaviors are like, oh, it kind of depends. These are some of those like R2 mid-range level behaviors that you're like, this could go either way. I'm not sure if this is safe or not. And we engage in a procedure that we say is low and slow, low demand, slow progression, which means you might honor the assent withdrawal and you might not, depending on what's occurring, but you're certainly going to make a modification to instruction to really help honor your learner. If it's safe for what they want to do, it's not an impact on hygiene. Generally, we fully honor that. But knowing that, again, there are boundary conditions, and those boundary conditions are environmentally specific. So the boundaries in a home are different from the boundaries in a clinic and are certainly different from the boundaries in a school. And I will say, I've worked in all three environments. The boundaries in the school are the most specific and may make the least amount of sense. There are a lot of rules in schools that do not make a whole lot of sense to me. And I have found that they're the least flexible boundaries. Well, everybody's allowed to do that, and nobody's allowed to do that. I'm like, we're not talking about nobody here, right? We're talking about a learner who is needing tier 3 intervention, which means completely individualized programming. It's like no one's allowed in the cafeteria when it's not lunchtime. And it's like, that seems like I don't think I want to die on that hill, right? Like nobody's allowed to run in the hall. I'm like, I'm not dying on that hill either, right? Like I'm just not going to do that. And what is your alternative, right? And so that's some of the work you have to do with your teams. But important to know there's boundary conditions in every environment. You cannot go into a situation and say, we do assent-based practice. Oh, can't do that because we honor assent withdrawal, we honor assent withdrawal, and not have the flip side of what are the boundaries and how are you going to keep somebody safe when a boundary condition occurs, because it's going to. Dr. Hanley calls them unplanned EOs. At some point, somebody is going to ask you something that you haven't programmed for. Something is going to happen that you did, because that's the way that the world works. And so building in that denial early on in programming is very, very important because, again, that's the way that the world works. Okay. A lot of the initial assent work, folks Michael Fabrizio coined the term vote with your feet. And so that's kind of the idea, is like where the learner wants to go, they're voting with their feet, they're deciding that way whether they kind of want to be there or not be there. This is an article that I really like, Assent and Behavior Analysis and Positive Behavior Supports, by Caspro and Kristen Smith, two precision teachers, by the way, on assent-based practice. This is a pretty common article where folks use, has become kind of the article where people really talk about the definition. And so this article talks about how assent-based practice involves structuring behavioral interventions to prioritize and respect the individual's autonomy and preference. So developing operational definitions or pinpoints about what assent and assent withdrawal looks like. So in our programming, I was telling you guys, we have these digital program binders. And on the front page, it's like all about your learner. And one of the things there is like, this is what assent looks like for this learner, and this is what assent withdrawal looks like. And it's kind of like, these are the low-level assent withdrawal behaviors, and these are the higher-level assent withdrawal behaviors. You know, I had a clinician ask me the other day, well, when responding, how do you know the difference between assent withdrawal and escape? And I was like, it took me aback, but for a second, because in my head I was like, isn't that the same thing? But I was like, this is a real question, So I checked my facial cues, and I was like, it doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter. The function doesn't matter in that situation. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to treat the behavior necessarily, right? Eloping as an assent withdrawal behavior isn't safe. So we might teach you more appropriate assent withdrawal behaviors, but generally assent withdrawal is escape, right? And generally a lot of those escalated behaviors are also escape maintained, right? And what we know is if we honor them at a lower level, we don't see those higher level behaviors occur. One of the other things that also people ask, and again, I don't think that this group is it, but I'm going to say it anyway, is doesn't reinforcing it, isn't that opposite of what we want to do in behavior analysis? And, one of the things I like to remind people about is the matching law, right? Is that, people say behavior goes where reinforcement flows. If you have 5 times more honoring of behavior for using functional communication versus honoring assent withdrawal for problem behavior, the behavior goes where the more plentiful reinforcement flows, right? And so it actually doesn't matter that you reinforce this behavior, 2 times or 4 times or whatever, as long as you are reinforcing that functional alternative at a much higher rate, a la skill-based treatment or other kind of functional communication training approaches. So anyway, those definitions are super important. The other thing that's super important is continuously monitoring and making data-driven adjustments. So using assent-based instruction is an intervention. It's an intervention and should be monitored just like any other intervention. So one of the things that we track is like number of assent withdrawal behaviors per day. And obviously we're looking for those to decrease, right? And what are the replacement behaviors? Well, maybe we're working on self-advocacy skills to be able to say, I don't know how to do this, or I need some help, or I don't want to do that right now. Um, Also monitoring, are they changing? So I'm working with a learner in a school, and thank you for this tip, Madi, because I'm using it. We just categorize the behavior by R1, R2, and R3, and that's how we're taking the data. Your low level, your mid level, your high level. And so what we're seeing in the data is our high level behaviors are going down, but our mid level and low level behaviors are going up. And they were like, that's not a good thing. And I was like, no, no, that is a good thing. And we don't want them to stay up. We want them to go down. I was like, but that's saying that they're getting that I don't have to engage in these escalated behaviors to get what I want or the outcome that I'm hoping for. I can actually engage in these lower level responses as well. So by responding at a lower level and honoring that assent withdrawal, or honoring, for this learner, it's also like a regulation strategy and whatever. We're demonstrating that we're actually going to reinforce that more and in a different way. And also, I kind of already said this, teaching that self-advocacy. So incorporating instruction of choice making, self-advocacy skills to really empower the learner to express their preferences. And that's, another E in that HRE, right? It's not just about engagement, it's also about empowerment. And that's where those kind of things all kind of come together. Some of the benefits of assent-based care is by honoring the individual's choice and preference. Assent-based care supports the development of autonomy and respects the dignity of the learner. So it shows that their voice matters. Improved engagement. When somebody feels like they are being heard and that they matter, they're more likely to want to engage with you, right? Just like you are with anybody in your own life. Ethical compliance. So there's that part that is part of our ethical standards. And then it does help with the rapport when the learner knows that when I engage in this, I can trust you, that you are going to honor what I'm asking for. You're not going to push me further than feels comfortable for me, and that we're continually engaging in, again, that bi-directional relationship. So it not only upholds ethical standards, but it also enhances the effectiveness of the humanity of the intervention, centering the learner's voice. If you haven't read this article, I would strongly encourage you to. It is a good one. I'm not sure who this, I think that this is a Meg slide.
It is 100% a
I
mix.
was like, I feel pretty certain that this is you, Meg.
Yep. So we have been touching on our self-care routine, if you will, throughout this entire workshop so far. Each time that we're touching on one of the buffers, we are contacting and building this skill and this habit for self-care. And the way I like to think about this is we are used to habit building. We're used to increasing behaviors for ourselves, right? While decreasing behaviors, I said for ourselves, for others. We are not used to doing this for ourselves. That makes then self-care sometimes this kind of ethereal concept that it's supposed to be getting your nails done, getting your hair done, working out, getting to go for a hike, going on a vacation, that those are how we increase our levels of self-care. However, it's not. It's actually much simpler than that. We just have attached this capitalistic mindset to what we think that it's supposed to be instead. And that's because people have made a lot of money off of self-care and marketing things to being self-care. It doesn't need to be that way. So if instead, what we did is we looked at self-care as making a subtle adjustment to each time that something feels out of alignment, which happens to us quite often. Just before I took a sip of water, I was like, ooh, I'm not going to be able to continue speaking unless I lubricate what's going on in my throat. There are many times, though, that I think that I'm like, oh man, it might seem embarrassing for me to take a sip of water and to take that pause for myself. We often have these types of inner behaviors come up, and then we end up neglecting ourselves in the process. This happens to us often at work, where we'll say, I can't attend to the fact that I need to pee because this person's in a behavioral episode where I feel like I have to be here. Well, are you then able to show up truly in that moment for that person? Are you probably going to make a less than ideal choice or judgment call because you haven't attended to your own needs yourself? Probably. We've all been in that situation. We've all been really hangry and taken it out on our partners or our best friends or our spouses or whoever might be close in closest proximity to us because we neglected ourselves. So self-care, Gina, I'm so glad you said this. Self-care isn't all of these big things. It is these little bitty shifts of taking care of ourselves and showing up for ourselves in the same way that we're attempting to show up for the learners that we work with and the families that we work with. So when we talk about what's your current level of self-care, we often think, well, I don't exercise on a regular basis. So clearly I'm a failure at self-care. I should just not even try anyway. But that's not what it's about. It's about building up these little behaviors, shaping the behavior of self-care so that we are reading our cues, tending to those signals within our bodies as we would with any stimulus, so that then we're changing and adjusting our behavior accordingly. And then, it's amazing. We don't have to provide external reinforcement for that or an external contingency to that because we intrinsically met the need. So we intrinsically contacted a positive contingency. Does that make sense? Awesome. That's what self-care is all about. Beautiful, y'all. I think this next little thing is about meaningful, and this is, again, going along the same lines. We can't project onto somebody else what's going to be meaningful for them, just as we wouldn't expect somebody else to do that for us. I'm not going to tell Jen, well, you really need to be exercising 3 times a week. Otherwise, you're not taking care of yourself. She would very kindly tell me to F off. Actually, she would say, like, fuck you, Meg. You don't know. Because you know
I'd
what?
probably just laugh. Like I
You
am.
would, but
That's
you probably
funny.
would also tell me to fuck off. You'd be
I'm
like,
like,
okay,
okay, yeah, okay, that's gonna
all
happen.
right, Meg. Cool, cool, cool. Yeah. So if that's your initial response, it's probably not good. It's not meaningful, right? And keep in mind that when we come into a caregiver's home and we say, well, you need to place that behavior on extinction. And if he's pointing to something, you need to prompt him to say, I want cookie. I want, I want, I want, I want. Sometimes they don't want. Sometimes that's not the appropriate carrier phrase and it's not meaningful to that context, to that environment, to that family, or to that learner. We do this way too much. We oversimplify, which means that we're also overgeneralizing behavior analytic processes and evidence-based strategies across too broad of an environment. So what we really need to do is take that step to just pause for a second, re-examine what's actually going to be meaningful to this family. That goes back to responsiveness and cultural safety. So everything that Monty beautifully brought to our attention several chapters ago when we were talking about responsiveness, the first R, this is what she was talking about. This is the heart of social validity. When we neglect examining and analyzing and leaning into a culture that is not our own, we then are unable to truly claim that what we're doing is socially valid. And I don't know if y'all have actually done this research, but it's been brought to our attention several times now. There, in most in the last couple of years, this has come up a few times. And I know for a fact that this came up in a Tarbucks et al. Article where we discussed what has actually been determined and assessed with socially valid measures. It's less than 15%. Of all of our quote unquote evidence-based strategies, only 15% or less actually measured or took the time to ensure that the methodology, that the procedure, that whatever it is that they're recommending and that what they're doing is actually socially valid. Many claim that it was, well, when we did informed consent, that's not that's not ensuring for social validity. Because if it were really socially valid, then they would say, you know what, this is something that I want to change. The learner would be 100% assenting, and we wouldn't be looking at all of these compliance-based strategies of how do we keep somebody chained to a table if it were truly meaningful. Jen was talking about rules within schools. Well, there's a reason why we often find ourselves in conflict with those types of rigid rules. It's because why do they matter? Well, they're here to keep us safe. Are they? Or is that here, does it make you uncomfortable? That's different. That's not meaningful. That only matters to you. If a student would rather stand up to learn, why does that matter to you? If to process information, they need to be pacing back and forth, why does that matter to you? You aren't the one learning right now. You're the one providing the instruction. You're the implementer right now. If you are on the receiving end, how would you want somebody to adapt and accommodate what you need? Because I guarantee you, you have something to say about what your needs are. And so we do this often as behavior analysts where we have this idea of what we think that it's supposed to be. And again, what we're doing is just projecting. Usually what we're even projecting isn't even something that we truly believe in ourselves. How many times as a supervisee or anywhere within your practice have you done something that made you feel uncomfortable because it wasn't meaningful to you? Anytime that I placed a demand when I was in grad school, my supervisor was like, you have to follow through. And I was like, that doesn't matter. When I say that we like throw that away, okay, but that wasn't actually his trash. It doesn't matter. I said pick it up, so he has to pick it up and throw it away. You're leaving no room for gray. You're leaving no room for self-advocacy. You're leaving no room to build that skill that we've been talking about here with assent-based care. You're leaving no room for that skill to be built and developed when you say it's my way or the highway. But I watch behavior analysts pick these struggles all the time. And really what they're doing is drawing a line in the sand. That's not building a community. That's not establishing a rapport. That's not ensuring safety. And it's sure as shit not being responsive because you're just telling them, I don't care what you have to say. This is what I'm saying. My voice is the only one in this relationship that matters. How many of us would stay married or in a relationship if that's what it was? My husband knows that it wouldn't last. If he were here right now, would laugh because he'd be like, no, oh, no. In fact, if anything, we know that we have to listen to each other. Otherwise, we buckle just like the building in the earthquake. We have to be flexible with each other, which means that we also have to bend to recognize that what I find meaningful might not be what you find meaningful. And so that really means that when we're looking at like this inner observer agreement, maybe we need to be thinking about who else needs to be agreeing about this. That's that person at that center of the care that's receiving it. If they're agreeing to it, if they're not withdrawing their assent, then hopefully it's meaningful to them. If they're maintaining these behaviors and these skills, they're meaningful to them. If they're not, you might need to check to see how meaningful it is, or if you have embedded enough engaging material and stimuli in ways that you're teaching it to make it meaningful for them. Another great precision teaching thing, and this actually comes from Skinner, but the rat is always, well, no, this was Lindsay. The rat's always right. So the learner is always going to be the right one. If your instruction is not meaningful, they're not going to continue to assent to it. That means you have to be the one who makes the adjustment, not the learner to rise to the occasion that they didn't even know they were supposed to rise to. All right, cool. Y'all, I highly encourage social validity checks within the work that you're doing. I highly suggest that what we do here is beyond just checking a box of like, I explained this procedure to the caregiver, because again, that's not how we get meaning out of what it is that we're doing. We're not selling snake oil. We're involving everybody in this process so that what we're doing is going to truly be impactful in the places that matter most. All right. I think this next little bit is actually Monty, but Jen, why don't you start us off with this part?
Sure. I'm going to piggyback on what you said about the rat always being right. So you were right. It is Skinner, but it is about an interaction with Skinner and Lindsley. So Og Lindsley was a student of B.F. Skinner. It is often paired with Lindsley and precision teaching, but Skinner is technically the one that said it. And so here's the way that the story goes. The way the story goes is once upon a time in Cambridge, Mass, in a building at Harvard where there was a cumulative recorder present, and Dr. Og Lindsley was studying with Skinner, and they were studying the behavior of rats and whatever they were doing. I don't know what they were doing, watching the rats, watching the cumulative recorder. And Lindsley was saying how, well, that is not how that's not how it was supposed to go. So he's looking at the data, and the data, if you're familiar with the cumulative recorder, right, it doesn't go down. It only stays the same or goes up, right? Because it's a cumulative record of the number, the rate of responses, right? And so Lindsay was like, "Well, that's impossible. The rat's not learning or whatever he said." And Skinner was like, "Well, the rat's always right." And so the idea is that like the learner is always right. So then Lindsley would say the learner is always right, and that was the interaction that pushed him to create the standard acceleration chart, which is based off of rate of responses. Um, I'll save that soapbox for a different day. But the kind of idea about that is kind of perfectly aligned with this slide on education is that, we put continuous here because education is continuous. Data is best done when it is continuous, and it's a continuous evolution of monitoring to see if, your learner is learning, right? And so you can be teaching, but that doesn't mean that learning happened. And so there's actually also a Skinner quote that is like, learning is what happened when all of the knowledge fades away. So learning is what stays when all of this like extraneous stuff fades away. So you can teach lots of things. Have you ever had learners that you work with, you're like, you teach them four things and then they lose one? Well, because they didn't learn it, right? They gained the knowledge, but it didn't stay with them, whether that was because there weren't retention checks or whether because it wasn't meaningful or whatever. And so the idea is that you're constantly evaluating the data, and it means you have good data that is evaluative, right? Poor data cannot evaluate progress. And you're using that for your decision making. And that's how you determine if learning is happening. And so when we say education, often that's confused with academics. But really, there's a lot that we learn in education and that is educational, that is not academic in nature, right? One of the big kind of topics that we think about in behavior analysis is like, what's one key skill that people don't learn in grad school? Soft skills. Why? I don't know why someone doesn't teach soft skills in grad school. Like we all need them to be able to do our jobs. It's behavior analysts. They teach them in med school. They teach them in nursing school. They teach them in veterinary school. For whatever reason, we don't learn about them in grad school, but they're important, right? And they're a part of our education and our growth towards being able to do our jobs effectively. Supervision, right? People don't teach you how to do supervision in graduate school. Yet when you become a BCBA, they expect you to supervise people. I mean, both on a managerial level and in fieldwork experience. But no one teaches you how to do either of those, right? And so one of the challenges we currently have in behavior analysis is that poor practice is getting handed down because people who weren't taught how, people who, one, didn't get good supervision, and two, weren't taught how to provide supervision, are then in a position where they're providing supervision for somebody else. But they don't actually have the knowledge to be able to do that, right? They didn't receive supervision education, if you will, right? And so a large part of what we do, and a large part of honestly where our field is failing, is not having meaningful data and not making data-based decisions. People make decisions and then are hoping that the data supports it. And that's exactly the opposite of the analysis of human behavior. In order to be a science, it means that you have to follow the data, whether you agree with it or not, whether you want it to show what it's showing or not, whether it went the way that you wanted it to go or not. And some of that goes back, right, to the humility that you need and the separation you need to have, that the rat is always right. The learner is always right. The data is always right. You know who's not always right? You. You're not always right. And I'm not always right. And nobody is always right. And being able to separate that just because the data shows that something is occurring that is not congruent with what you were hoping was happening does not mean you're a bad person, does not mean that you're a bad behavior analyst, and does not mean that you don't know how to do your job. But I will say, if you don't listen to the data and you don't stay, stop, or change, and you don't do what needs to be done, I do think you're a bad behavior analyst. Because that's the antithesis of what behavior analysis is teaching a skill, cultivating it, right? Taking the data, watching the data, analyzing the data, and adjusting. And that's a part of, I did a talk a couple of years ago for an ethics talk about keeping the analysis and behavior analysis, and the reasons why kind of our field is shifting in that direction. Some of it is people just don't know how to do that. And some of it is people don't have time to. People are bound by, there are insurance companies that don't pay for data and programming, right? And so it's like, well, that doesn't go towards my billable, so I'm not going to do it. Actually, you can't do ABA if you're not doing that. That's literally what ABA is. But those are factors and competing contingencies on somebody's time that impact why they are or are not doing that. So I don't think it's that like everybody's terrible and, they really don't want to be analytic. I think that people just don't always know how. Anyway, but to say that you have meaningful education, you have to be able to have the data to support that, right? If anyone has ever been in an IEP meeting, or I don't know what the equivalent is called in the UK, but we go into these meetings, right? And someone's like, oh, well, Johnny's blah, 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 blah. Oh, great. What do you have to? Oh, that's anecdotal. And I'm like, I have a shirt that says, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. I'm like, your anecdotal data is probably based on what happened 45 seconds ago, because I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. I don't know if you guys can, but I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. And I certainly can't remember what the data for one of my 32 students looked like yesterday. Right. And so it adds this level of subjectivity into it, which is what Skinner wanted to take out, right? He said, this is what makes us a natural science and not a social science. And that doesn't mean that social sciences are shit. They're not. They're not shit, but they're not natural sciences. And the things that make us a natural science is being objective. And in order to say that somebody has received an education, you need to objectively be able to show that they can demonstrate skills that they were not taught prior, right? And oh man, I could stand on this soapbox for the rest of my life, probably. That I will die on this hill, actually. Like when people are like, "Are you going to die on that?" No, no, this will be the
That'll
hill
be.
that I like literally. Rest in peace, crappy data, and here I am, right? Like,
And I would
um,
say too,
yeah,
Jen, you like we were talking about like bringing it towards our learners too, but then we also have to think about this same type of education piece with the technicians and the direct implementers. And I know you, yeah, you're probably taking us there, and I'm sorry.
no, it's a no. That was probably a really good prompt for me to like actually get us there. But yes, and so as supervisors, having that for our technicians obviously equal importance. And so many techs report that they don't know how they're doing in their job performance at any given time. Why is it that behavior analytic organizations are not running their organizations behavior analytically? Now, some people think that I'm nuts because we literally have like a spreadsheet of KPIs that are ranked and weighted and valued, and that's how people are reviewed. And their monetary performance-based raises are directly attributed to the ways that their percentages of their weighted KPIs come into play. Because guess what? Having your session notes done is more important in some places, and certainly in my business it is, because we can't bill if your session note isn't done. So as an employer, that's very important to me, and in fact more important to me than if you wore your uniform. I also care if you wore your uniform, but your session notes are weighted higher. People need to understand what their job is. They need to understand how to implement programming and having that continual and ongoing behavioral skills training, evaluation. Where people fall off in behavioral skills training is literally the most important part. And so the part of behavioral skills training that people are generally really good at is like, I showed them the procedure. I asked them if they had any questions. Great, step one accomplished. I modeled it for them. Great, step two accomplished. I watched them do it. Great. Oh, and then you were done. But the most important part is the end, is the feedback. And it's a feedback loop. It's the loop of you did this, let me show you. You did this, let me show you. You did this really well. Awesome. You're going towards fluency, right? And then what happens is people are missing low level behaviors that they're supposed to know how to do as a technician. And then supervisors expect them to make higher level discriminations, right? And this is why we don't have good problem solvers, because we never taught them how to solve problems. We taught them how to read recipes. Um, and so using these same evaluative tools with your technicians is crucial. And so there's this part is obviously in the book as well, or else it wouldn't be in this PowerPoint. Did I cover it well? I think this was your slide, Maudie. So is there anything you want to add in or tell me, no, you didn't do that right?
No, you did it beautifully. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I had to go be a clinic. I
You had
had
to
to
go
work
do your
at the
job?
clinic.
Hear you.
Yeah, I had to go do my job. I had to go sign some RBT competencies. So I was like, right now? They said yes before they leave. So thank you. I appreciate that. No, that's fantastic.
Anything you want to add, Meg? I think this was our last slide for today. So
Yeah.
I don't know if this is where we wanted to close out, open up for questions.
I think let's open up for some questions. And then I just put in the chat too, just again, the pre-order link for Reframe. So just to recap again, so we've got responsive, engaging, flexible, radical, assent-based education. We really wanted to add a lot of meaning to what this acronym was. It took us a long time to put it all together, in all honesty. But we wanted to make sure that this framework that we're presenting is going to be something that is discussion based. There are lots of questions within each chapter so that you can ask yourselves these questions, ask them with your colleagues as you're reading it together, so that it can be an active shift throughout this field. Because I do think that that's what we're missing right now. And Jen just talked about it. We're really missing these critical thinking skills because we are expecting, and this, I think many of us have experienced this, we're supposed to be able to essentially take these studies and replicate them without a ton of training, right? Without any training. I had many behavior analyst friends who would say, well, I didn't get the full BST on this. I'm like, well, they're just behavior analytic principles. You're supposed to be able to piece together all of these behavior analytic principles and procedures and techniques and tools and supports to account for this that you're seeing. Not just provide continuous reinforcement because that's what's easiest to do, but to say like, okay, now here's the challenge. We're going to start demand fading. What does this actually look like? Am I able to meet the learner where their needs are? And am I able to show up in a space that's safe for them so that they are going to continuously demonstrate assent instead of assent withdrawal behaviors? So that's also why we wanted it to be assent-based and really amplifying that model. Because again, what Jen pointed out earlier, if we're able to do this with apex predators, why the fuck can't we do this with kids? Why can't we honor our own assent withdrawals by then saying, like, this is a boundary for me. I'm going to care for myself and vote with my feet and move my own self away, right? We struggle with that. So again, I'd love to open it up to questions if y'all got anything for us. Awesome. I do like that y'all were able to keep going in the chat. That's always helpful and really good. It's a lot to absorb, a lot to think about, a lot to process. And I will say this, I'm glad we did this introduction because then again, the next piece is where we get a little bit more radical with our approach because we really are going to start talking about our own behaviors in the next piece of the workshop on Friday so that get comfortable feeling kind of uncomfortable for a minute for sure. Beautiful, y'all. Well, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Fantastic.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Um, oh, Meg, is there anything we need to do for CEs?
For CEs, if you could go ahead and just check in. So just go ahead and put in your BCBA number real quick. That way we can at least get you checked in for the first part, and then we'll have you checked out then at the end of the next one so that we can get the full credit of the CEUs for the event. Perfect. Awesome, everyone. And then for anybody who's going to be doing the recording, we'll have a quiz. And then we'll also provide our survey at the end of the workshop. Amazing, everyone. We'll also make sure that at the end of the full recording will be available, but it'll be separated into two different parts. I think that's everyone now. Beautiful. Thanks, everyone.
Woohoo.
Okay. Have a wonderful weekend. Do something that you love.